Welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA predictions for UFC 127, Penn versus Fitch. The event will take place on February 26, 2011, live from Sydney, Australia's Acer Arena. The show will feature 5 main card fights that I'll be giving my predictions for. Before moving on, I need to address my last performance at Strikeforce Fedor versus Silva. I went 1-4 on the night, by far my worst set of predictions to date. I got the opening fight bang on, overing by submission, and then it got worse from there. Now, I've been gambling long enough to understand there will be nights like this when it doesn't matter whether you're betting on MMA, hockey, football, whatever sport. My overall record now sits at 60-30, so again, I'm back at getting every 2 of 3 fights right. Now, in my defense, I did think that Silva had a chance to win that fight. If you followed my advice about betting on potential tournament winners, you've got a fighter in each of the semifinals, with 2 more fights still to go. The performance that Silva put on was impressive, and at the same time, you really have to wonder about Fedor and where he is at this stage in his career. But I'm going to touch upon that a little bit later on in my new segment I'm going to add to my show called Kamikaze Corner. As always, my videos are associated with sportsinteraction.com. If you want to bet on the fights, you can click on the link in the description below, and you'll receive a deposit bonus and up to $125 with Sports Interaction will match what you deposit. I'd like to send a quick shout out to the sites that allow me to post my video: lowkick.com, MMA News, MMA Core, ShareDog, and Bloody Elbow, just to name a few. And I've updated my ranking system with movement in both the light heavyweight and middleweight division, so check that out and let me know what you think. Please feel free to subscribe to my channel by clicking on the button on my video overlay, comment on my rankings and picks, and on that note, let's get to the predicting. We kick off UFC 127 with a middleweight contest as Australian native Kyle Noke, 18-4-1, squares off with Chris Kamikaze, 14-3. Noke has been victorious in his last 4 bouts, including winning his first 2 UFC fights, one by TKO and the other by tap-out. Kamikaze is riding his own 4-fight winning streak with decision wins in his first 2 UFC matchups. The Aussie will enter the fight as the betting favorite, paying $1.48, while Kamikaze will be the underdog at $2.45. Now, both these fighters are Ultimate Fighter alums from Season 11. Noke won his preliminary and quarterfinal matchups before falling victim in the semifinals against Chris McRae. On the other hand, Chris Kamikaze's stint on the reality show came to an abrupt halt pretty much before it got started. Kamikaze battled through a very difficult qualifier matchup that, despite winning, resulted in a broken jaw and his withdrawal from the competition. Looking at these fighters, Noke and Kamikaze have a lot of similarities. Physically, they're about the same size. They both have shown they can win fights in a variety of ways, and they're each looking to take the next step in the middleweight division. Breaking down their skill sets, neither one of these fighters are overly refined in the striking game. Kamikaze likes to come forward aggressively with strikes, looking to tie up with his opponent, which can result in one of 2 things. Either Kamikaze drags his opponent down to the mat, or he grabs hold of a tie clinch and delivers knees to the body and head. From the footage I've seen of Kamikaze, the clinch really seems to be his most dependable form of attack, as he relies on it heavily when engaging. Both Kamikaze and Noke will mix in leg strikes and punches, but neither are overly fluid. Kyle Noke does possess a stiff jab and seems to be a little lighter on his feet than Kamikaze, but just like his opponent, Noke's stand-up is primarily a setup aimed at getting the fight to the mat. When the fight does go to the ground, Noke has 7 career submission victories, including his last fight in the UFC, while Kamikaze has won by tap-out 5 times. Along with their submissions, both fighters like to use ground and pound and have forced referee stoppages in previous victories. Looking at how this fight might play out, I think it could come down to takedown defense. I figured that both fighters will be looking to go to the mat, so whoever is able to defend best against this should have the most success in this fight. In his last matchup, Kyle Noke showed pretty good takedown defense, and combining that with his ability to use the double underhooks to secure takedowns, he was able to dictate where the fight took place. On the other hand, I question Kamikaze's takedown D against Dong Yi Yang. In his last fight, he got taken down on a few occasions, and in his most recent defeat, Jesse Taylor took Kamikaze down on a regular basis and kept him there. Like I said, I think this fight will come down to takedowns, both scoring and defending them. And I think that Noke is just a little bit better at both. So far in the UFC, Noke has proven to be a finisher, and I think he will be fired up to be in front of his home country. So my prediction is Kyle Noke to defeat Chris Kamikaze by submission. Up next, we find ourselves in the UFC welterweight division as Chris lights out Lytle, 40-17-4, will meet injury replacement Brian Ebersol, 46-14-1. This fight was originally expected to be between Lytle and Carlos Condit, which was a highly anticipated bout, but an injury forced Condit out, and time constraints made it difficult to find a willing UFC opponent, so they had to go outside the company. Now, before we get into the actual matchup, I think this is a very dangerous fight for Lytle. If he wins it, his position in the 170 doesn't change. If he loses this fight, it could have a significant impact on where his career goes from here. Now, there aren't any odds posted yet, but I would think that Chris Lytle will be the heavy favorite, probably in the neighborhood of $1.15, and Eversol around $4.55, probably higher. Now let's break this fight down. Eversol has a ton of MMA experience with 58 fights under his belt, and has been in the cage with names like Stephan Bonner, Ed Herman, Kyle Noak, Hector Lombard, and Carlos Newton, who he defeated in late 2010. He is riding a 7-fight winning streak with 3 stoppages, 2 decisions, and 1 submission. Before I break down Eversol's skill sets, I want to highlight a couple of things that make this guy a very interesting character. In his fight with Hector Lombard, he walked into the ring with a mic, verbally agitating the crowd, playing the role of the bad guy. Then after almost 4 rounds of taking a beating, he was on his back with Lombard in his guard, and he wasn't taking any punishment at the time, when all of a sudden he motioned to the ref and just said he had enough, he'd quit. In his fight against Carlos Newton, he shaved his chest hair in the form of an arrow pointing up to his chin, so Newton would know where to aim for. Interesting. Now, talent-wise, Eversol has the ability to win this fight. There's no arguing that. He has roughly 33 wins via submission or stoppage, meaning he knows how to finish fights. Eversol has a wrestling background. He can defend up his back well enough, and his takedown defense is admirable. Having said that, he has been submitted 9 times, which accounts for over half of his defeats. On the feet, he's an unorthodox striker. He likes to cover up with his elbows pointed out and absorb strikes before striking out with an elbow at an unsuspecting opponent. Along with his elbow strikes, he throws different kicks and knees, and has become known for using a cartwheel kick in his matchups, which I'll be very curious to see if he tries to pull that off in the UFC. He will have a 6-inch reach advantage over Lytle, but he doesn't use a lot of movement, and he tends to stand straight up and down, which can leave him vulnerable against a good striker. Having said that, he's never been knocked out, so he is capable of taking a great deal of punishment. Now, UFC veteran Chris Lytle is looking to put himself in the title picture, but a win here won't do that. Lytle is riding a 4-fight winning streak and has won 5 of his last 6. Lytle knows how to finish fights as well, with 23 victories ending before the final bell, 19 by submission. Lytle's a BJJ black belt and has a pretty slick ground game, which he showed most recently against Matt Brown and Brian Foster, especially against Foster, where he rolled beautifully into a knee bar for the win. On top of this, he has never been submitted, and I don't expect he will be in this matchup. In the striking department, Lytle is a former pro boxer, so he has skills there, but with only 4 knockouts to his credit, he hasn't shown a great deal of finishing power on his feet. Having rewatched his last fight with Matt Serra, it reaffirms for me how tough Chris Lytle really is. They were both throwing bombs in that matchup, and Lytle certainly got the better of the exchanges, but he also took a number of big shots. Lytle's only been stopped twice in his career by Thiago Alves and Joe Riggs, both of which came as a result of a cut, which tells me it's not easy to get him out of there. Lytle stands right in the pocket when he throws, which results in him taking a lot of damage, but also results in a lot of UFC bonuses, and to date he's collected 7. Getting down to the actual fight, I don't think Eversol has a lot to offer Lytle anywhere in this fight, other than the ability to absorb a lot of damage, which I expect will be the case. I don't think the UFC veteran will take this matchup lightly, as he will understand the consequences of a defeat in this contest, and with the exception of his last fight, Eversol hasn't been able to take that next step by defeating higher level opponents. I expect to see a lot of Eversol covering up and Lytle landing strikes at will. As long as Lytle doesn't get caught with one of Eversol's elbows or kicks, Chris should control the fight on the feet. With Eversol's track record of being submitted, I would think Lytle will look to take advantage of this in search of another bonus. Eversol takes heavy damage early on as my expectations, which could result in the fight going to the mat where Lytle will start sub-hunting, so my prediction is Chris Lytle to defeat Brian Eversol by submission. In the UFC lightweight division, Australian native George Sotiropoulos, 14-2, will meet 17-7 Dennis Siver. Siver comes to UFC 127 with 2 consecutive wins and victories in 6 of his last 7 fights, while Sotiropoulos has won 8 in a row and hasn't lost a matchup since 2006. On the books, Siver is the heavy underdog, paying at $3.45, while George will be both the fan favorite and the betting favorite at $1.27. I think this fight will be in contention for Fight of the Night, and the winner will start to hear his name in title contender talks. This is one of those matchups that pits a grappling ace against a very dangerous striker, but both of these competitors are quite capable beyond their main disciplines. Let's start off with Dennis Siver on the mat. He's a BJJ purple belt, holding 9 victories by submission, including 2 in the UFC, and is also trained in Sambo. In his last fight, he showed impressive skills when he took Andre Winner's back, used his leg to trap the arm, and then completed the rear naked choke for the win. but I wanted to see how Siver handled a top-level grappler, so I reviewed his fight with Gray Maynard back in 2008 and was surprised by how well he did on the mat. In that fight, the German was able to take Maynard down, took his back twice, and was able to reverse Gray from the bottom and roll the top position. He did lose that matchup. It took a fair bit of punishment on the mat, but he survived the full 15. Along with his grappling skill, Siver has some solid strikes from the mat, both top and bottom. Because of his short, compact arms, he's able to really swing in tight. Now, I'm not going to try and convince you that Siver will be able to match Sotiropoulos in the grappling department, but he definitely won't be a fish out of water by any stretch. Now, the Aussie's mat game is top-level stuff. He holds 8 submission wins in his career, has never been tapped out, and he's a BJJ black belt. I know that 8 subs isn't a staggering number, but you must take into account his fights against Kurt Pellegrino and Joe Stevenson, where he uses superior grappling and just smothered these guys on route to decision wins. In his last fight, he submitted a very capable grappler in Joe Lozon by simply picking him apart on the mat until the right submission presented itself, and that was that. Further, the fact that George has never been submitted is pretty impressive, especially if you look at some of the guys he's faced. Quickly running down the list along with their submission victory totals, you've got Kurt Pellegrino with 10, Joe Lozon with 15, Jason Dent 15, Joe Stevenson 15, and submission legend Shinya Aoki with 16. Quickly before moving on, it's important to note that Siver has been submitted 4 times in his 7 defeats. Now let's talk striking. We'll stick with Sotiropoulos. He has an amateur boxing background, which tells me he has solid mechanics. He holds his hands up well, keeping his right a little closer to his chin, which he keeps tucked nicely, and he's never been knocked out. He strings together some decent punching combinations, and he rocked Pellegrino early, which I really think set the tone in that match. On the negative side, he only has 1 knockout to his credit. He doesn't use nearly enough kicks to mix things up, and he can struggle with an opponent's speed. This was quite evident early on in the Lozon fight, as Joe was able to connect on several occasions, while the Aussie seemed to be unable to score, mainly because of the speed issue. Dennis Siver's forte is his kickboxing. He's a German kickboxing champ and has 5 knockout victories, including 2 highlight reel spinning back kicks. Looking at his last fight, Siver's ability to deal with the Brits, Andre Winter's incredible speed was very impressive. Winter's probably the fastest striker in the 155-pound division, and Siver timed him, landed several good shots, and avoided a great deal of Winter's strikes, including the barrage that Siver ducked below before countering with a very stiff left hook. Siver has a great deal of power behind his punches, good defense, is a very effective counter striker, and the way he backs away while still striking gives opponents fits. Siver's kicks are quick and powerful. He throws them high and low, inside and out, and you would think that he'd be hesitant to kick against a grappler, but in the Maynard fight, he threw them at will. I think this is generally because he throws them so quickly. Most times he lands them and gets them back down before an opponent can react. Now, the betting odds are very much in favor of Sotiropoulos. The fans will be too, and I have read on a lot of the boards out there that people think George will take this one easy. Looking back at the Lozon fight, George really struggled with the striking speed of his opponent and wasn't able to get comfortable until Joe slowed down. Siver doesn't slow down, and if he is able to connect as often as Lozon did, George's chin will be tested. Further, I think that Siver's compact stature will actually benefit him in this fight. With a low center of gravity, it will force George to really dive in and commit to his takedown attempts, which could open him up to get tagged. George could very well control Siver on the mat and maybe even submit him, but in this fight, I'll take the vicious striking power of the German along with the hefty $3.45, so my pick is Dennis Siver to upset George Sotiropoulos by stoppage and silence the Australian crowd. In the co-main event of the evening, 18-7 Jorge El Conquistador Rivera will go to war with 21-3 Michael the Count Bisping in the middleweight division. Bisping has won 2 consecutive fights in 6 of his last 8 overall, while Rivera is riding a 3-fight winning streak with 6 wins in his last 8 fights as well. The British native Bisping will pay out at a rate of $1.22, and Rivera, the underdog, will provide a return of $3.80 on the dollar. This fight was signed surrounding a little bit of bad blood, with Michael Bisping suggesting that he didn't want to fight Rivera as he wanted a higher caliber opponent, and the first thing I thought of when I heard this was Chris Leben tapping out Yoshihiro Akiyama after Akiyama had made a similar statement. This matchup's going to happen, so let's see if we can figure out how it will end. Let's start with the mat game. Neither one of these guys is overly known for their grappling or submission skills. Statistically, Bisping has 4 submission wins with 0 defeats, and Rivera 2 tap-out victories while having been submitted on 3 occasions. Bisping has no UFC subs and hasn't tapped an adversary since 2005, while Rivera is in the same boat with nothing in the octagon. His last sub was in 2002, and taking it one step further, all 3 of his submission defeats took place in the UFC. Jorge will take the fight to the mat. but when it gets there, his focus is primarily on roughing up his opponent. He has some nasty ground and pound and has shown the ability to finish fights there. Bisping has used takedown and ground and pound effectively in the past as well, most notably against Jason Day, Dennis Kang, and Wanderlei Silva. Against Kang, Bisping lost the opening round, but when the second frame started, he used takedowns to change the complexion of the match and eventually earned the win via referee stoppage. Against Wanderlei, he showed a pretty nice shot and used takedowns early to score points, which I think he could do in this fight as well to try and zap Jorge's endurance levels. Either way, I would still expect a large portion of the fight will be contested on the feet. With 24 KO or TKOs split evenly between them, these guys have shown that they know how to finish fights. Now, on the other side of that statistic, both fighters have suffered highlight reel KO defeats. Bisping's lone knockout was delivered by Dan Henderson's devastating right hand. Having examined some of his other fights, the British issues with fighters who have power in their right. The punch that Dennis Kang scored with early was his right. Wanderlei almost knocked Bisping out at the end of their bout with a right hand, and Akiyama stumbled him early on in their fight, which was also with his right. Offensively, Bisping does bring a fair bit to the table. He's very quick with good foot and head movement, which for the most part makes him difficult to engage. He moves in and out from the outside, usually staying out of range of his opponent's attacks. He mixes up his arm strikes and leg strikes quite effectively and has shown that he will fake a low kick and then go high, which can serve both as an offensive attack and to keep an opponent from getting too comfortable in the striking. He hasn't really shown one-punch knockout power, but his strikes do add up and will take a toll on an opponent. He seems to have the best success when he sits down on his punches and commits to them instead of throwing them as an afterthought to being defensive. Finally, Bisping's best asset is his endurance. He can really push the pace and will open up with striking when his opponent begins to fade like he did versus Akiyama. As I said already, Rivera also suffered big-time knockouts. Terry Martin KO'd him in 14 seconds, and Chris Lehman stopped him in less than 2 minutes, so Rivera is far from unstoppable. On the positive side, he has good leg kicks, a solid right hand, which could be a determining factor in this fight, and works well from the clinch. Jorge is not afraid to get in tight and mix it up. With his opponents, he has good power, as he showed against Nate Corey, by simply pounding away until Corey couldn't defend himself anymore. But Rivera's best opportunity to win is to brawl and slug it out with his opponents. Now, where Bisping is a smooth striker with combinations, Rivera attacks with single strikes looking to do damage and then swarm with a barrage. I like Jorge's use of the clinch. It can really turn a fight in his favor when he's able to use it to both control his opponent and deliver knee strikes and short punches. Now, again, another major difference between these two fighters is endurance. Bisping can go a full 3 rounds at the same pace, while Evera will slow down fairly noticeably. He's still quite dangerous, but his strikes come a lot slower and are far more telegraphed. When I began preparation for this prediction, I really wanted to look at how Bisping's past opponents were able to get in and do damage with their strikes. Rivera is a heavy hitter, but there's more to it than just that. In this fight, Bisping will have advantages in technique, speed, reach, and endurance, all of which will be huge. Rivera has the power to win this matchup, but I see only a small window early on for him to connect before he tires, and the speed difference becomes even more noticeable. I expect that Bisping will work from the outside, keeping out of Rivera's range, and maybe mix in some takedowns to hasten Jorge's endurance failing. In his last 5 fights, Bisping has fought 3 BJJ black belts, 2 elite level grapplers, so you're required to focus more on just their stand-up skills, and this won't be the case in this fight. So my prediction is Michael Bisping to defeat Jorge Rivera by decision. Moving to the main event, welterweight contender John Fitch, 25-3, will collide with former divisional champion 16-7-1 BJ the Prodigy Penn. The Prodigy enters this bout after a successful return to welterweight, where he knocked out Matt Hughes in just 21 seconds, while John Fitch defeated Thiago Alves for his 5th consecutive win and 21st in his last 22 fights. Fitch is the betting favorite at $1.55 and Penn the underdog at $2.30. Now, we all know who John Fitch and BJ Penn are, and we all have known what they've done in the past. Fitch seems to be able to beat everyone but George St. Pierre, owning a 16-fight winning streak in his career before that fight with GSP. And BJ Penn is one of the greatest fighters of all time, a former multi-divisional champion who has competed in an impressive 11 fights where a UFC title was on the line. Now let's start with Fitch's strongest attribute. He's a wrestler who has made a career of grinding out victories by smothering his opponents and working them over bell to bell. Now, this style has garnered him some criticism for being a boring fighter, and statistically, he has more decision wins, 13, than submissions and stoppages combined, 10. Nonetheless, he has been getting the job done by simply engaging and dragging his opponent to the ground, keeping him there and beating them up. He's a black belt in Guerrilla Jiu-Jitsu, has a very good guard, and like I said, he holds 5 submission wins, the last coming in 2007, but it's evident in his fight that he is willing to go for subs if he gets the opportunity. He's only been tapped out once in his career, but he has found himself in a few submission attempts, especially against Paulo Thiago. When looking to take his opponents down, Fitch prefers to do so from in tight instead of shooting in from the outside, which works well as long as he can get his hands on his opponent. Now, BJ Penn's ground game is equally as impressive, but for other reasons. He's a BJJ black belt, owns 6 submission wins over names like Florian, Stevenson, Pulver, Hughes, and Gomi, and he's never been tapped out. He's dangerous from the top and bottom. When he gets put on his back, he likes to work the rubber guard to neutralize his opponent. He threatens with subs, and the image that really defines for me how difficult Penn is to control was when he climbed out from underneath Matt Hughes and took his back in the second round of their second fight. Penn is difficult to control on the mat, but not impossible, as GSP demonstrated in their second fight, and not only did George control him there, he broke him on the mat as well. Now, another impressive aspect of BJ's grappling game is his takedown defense. BJ is very difficult to take down, he has great balance, and while defending he can really do a lot of punishment. On the feet, BJ has heavy hands, good boxing skills, and fluid body movement. He likes to use a lightning fast jab to pick apart an opponent, and his body motion makes him difficult to attack, but again, not impossible. Frankie Edgar had success striking with Penn, but Edgar is incredibly quick and far faster than Fitch, so I don't see that being an issue in this contest. Penn can mix things up too. He can drive forward with strikes looking to overwhelm a fighter, and will also do some striking in close, sometimes opting to grab the back of an opponent's head, pulling him into his uppercuts. 7 of Penn's 16 wins have come via stoppage. Against Diego Sanchez, he opened up a nasty cut with a kick, resulting in a stoppage. He stopped Sean Sherk with a knee to the head and punches, and most recently dropped Matt Hughes cold with a right hand. Now, Fitch's striking isn't overly pretty, but it's improving. He will throw single shots along with some combinations. More recently, he's shown the ability to change levels, attacking the head and body, which has made him a much more dangerous striker. He's fairly light on his feet, has pretty good movement, and has been using more kicks and knees in his most recent fights. He likes to use his strikes instead of takedowns, throwing or faking, getting his opponent to react, and then grabbing a double leg. Comparing the fighter's endurance, Fitch will have a clear edge. His tendency to go the distance, having done so in each of his last 8 bouts, shows he can keep up the pace, and he's tough. He took a beating in the title fight with GSP, but gutted it out and went the distance. Now, Penn's endurance has been criticized. He's shown he can fight a full fight, but he's not nearly the same fighter in the later stages of those fights. Fitch is very capable of doing what GSP did against Penn, take him down and beat him up for the entire matchup. But that is easier said than done. He will have a size and strength advantage over BJ, which will help him in the grappling department. But Penn was able to defend early on against George's takedowns, and Fitch is not nearly as explosive from the outside with his shot as St. Pierre is, and I think BJ should be able to avoid Fitch when he tries to get in tight and use his balance to defend if John does get a hold of him. On the mat, Paulo Thiago, Thiago Alves, and Diego Sanchez all had areas of success in their fights against Fitch, either moving to top position or attacking with submissions. If they can do it, I think Penn will be able to have success there too. Penn will have a striking edge with his technique and quickness, which will be magnified if he can keep the fight standing. That is a huge if. In fact, that if will probably decide this fight. If Penn keeps it standing or is able to get back up, I think he really has a good chance to win this one. If he can't, Fitch will grind him out for 3 rounds. I'm going to take a risk on this one and take the underdog BJ Penn to defeat John Fitch by decision. This next segment, I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about some prevalent MMA issues. I'm going to call it Kamikaze Corner. And the first thing, obviously, is Fedor Emelianenko and his situation. He's lost Antonio Silva. Of course, there's people out there who think Fedor's invincible. He's not. That was shown this past weekend. But he's still a great fighter. But the big issue is he's an undersized heavyweight taking on giants who have incredible skill sets. The rumor is he's going to continue fighting. I hope he's doing it for the right reasons. I hope he can come back and be as dominant as he was in the past and end his career in his own terms. Secondly, Strikeforce's presentation last weekend below what it should have been. The audio issues bothered me. I heard some things from the commentary, like Frank Shamrock mentioning that Andrei Arlovski has now dropped 4 consecutive fights by knockout. Not the case. He had a decision with Antonio Silva. This shows me why the UFC is still the elite company when it comes to putting on shows. You know, the lower fights, the Grand Prix reserve bouts, not nearly what they should have been. And finally, the last thing I want to touch on before I go is GSP versus Anderson Silva. This fight needs to happen because I think when people look back at these two fighters when they're long retired, they're going to question if it didn't happen, why it didn't happen. I think it'll be a knock on both their careers, even though, you know, it doesn't matter who they beat. They're two of the greatest fighters fighting at the same time. They need to fight. Please make this fight happen. And that's all the time we have for Kamikaze Corner. Please make comments and let me know what you think. So those are my predictions for UFC 127. Take a look at the Sports Interaction betting card for the odds and payouts. With some underdog action for this coming event, there could be some money to be made. So for betting purposes, please check out sportsinteraction.com for your deposit bonus. The link is in the description. And hopefully I rebound from my last show and make some money this time. Now it's time to go, so thank you for watching Kamikaze Overdrive MMA predictions for UFC 127, and I'll see you back here next time.